How one man's ambition carved a capital out of concrete and memory. The weight of a building. There are buildings that sit politely on their street, like guests at a dinner table. And there are buildings that occupy a city the way a mountain occupies a horizon. In Bucharest, there is such a mountain, 270 meters by 240, tens of meters high. A mass of marble and concrete so vast that engineers argue it is among the heaviest buildings ever constructed. It is not merely in Bucharest. It casts a gravity that bends the city around it. This is the Palace of the Parliament. But the building is only the most visible fragment of a far larger act, an urban project that tore out an entire chunk of the city and replaced it with a diagram of power. To understand the palace, you must first understand the plan that made it possible. And to understand the plan, you must return to a night when the earth itself shook. Part 1. The night the walls moved. Romania sits at the eastern edge of Europe, where the Carpathians fold like a clenched fist, and where deep beneath the ground, a seismic engine occasionally slips a gear. The Vrancaya zone, notorious among geologists, stores energy for years in hidden faults and releases it in sudden, punishing waves. On March 4, 1977, Bucharest learned again what the ground can do. The earthquake measured over 7 on the Richter scale. Apartment blocks shuddered like ships in a storm. Stairwells peeled away, facades let go. When the shaking stopped, more than 1,500 people were dead. Thousands of homes had fallen or cracked beyond repair, and tens of thousands were displaced in a city already stretched thin. For most Romanians, the quake was grief and shock, the kind of event that splits memory into before and after. For one Romanian, it was something else. A pretext. Romania's leader, Nicolae Ceaușescu, emerged from the crisis not humbled but empowered. He declared that Bucharest would not merely rebuild. It would be remade a socialist capital fit for a socialist nation, a city that would embody the endurance and modernity he claimed as his own. The earthquake did not cause the project to come. It cleared the stage. Part 2. The city as a stage set. Every strong man wants a durable symbol, the kind of object you can point to from a podium and say, "Look, this is me." For Ceausescu, that symbol would not be a statue or a mausoleum. It would be a city axis, a straight line of state through the heart of the capital, ending in a building so large it would make all others seem like furniture. The plan had 3 principal elements: a citadel of government, the Casa Poporului, People's House, later known as the Palace of the Parliament, a megastructure that would gather the nation's political institutions into a single fortress. A horizontal procession of administration, a file of ministries and bureaucratic buildings, arranged like soldiers in uniform. A monumental boulevard grand, ceremonial avenue lined with new apartment blocks intended for the party elite, a residential proscenium framing the theater of state. A city is
Things
not
you wouldn't
paper,
want
however.
anyone else to know.
Between lines on a map and marble on the ground,
We're in a situation
lies
where we're not
land
just
and
fighting
the
for
people who
ourselves.
live upon it.
We're fighting for
Ceausescu's
the
chosen
soul of this
stage
city.
sat on Arsenal Hill, an elevated terrain
The
near the
truth
center that
is a
offered,
fragile thing.
engineers said, a more
It
stable
shatters easily
foundation
in the wrong
than other
hands.
quarters. The quake had
I remember
severely
the first time
damaged
I
some
saw it.
organs of state.
The air was
The
cold,
next quake
still.
must not. The
There
leader
was a
would
sense
build
of
on safer
finality to
ground.
everything.
Safer ground,
A lot of times we
unfortunately,
don't
had a
know
problem.
what we're
It was
missing
already a neighborhood.
until it's gone.
For Ceausescu, this was not a problem at all. Part
They
3.
think they're in control,
Systematization.
but
A
they don't
country
know what's
reshuffled
coming.
in the mid-1970s, the Communist Party adopted a policy it called systematization,
At that point,
a
I felt
national
like
program
I
to
really wanted
modernize
to
the
invest in
Romanian
something
landscape.
I really enjoyed.
The idea, on paper, was to concentrate resources, to densify housing, and to transform villages into
I
agro-industrial
know things
centers
about you.
with civic squares, cultural
Things you wouldn't
halls,
want anyone
and
else to
apartment
know.
blocks, miniature cities,
We're in a
replacing what the party
situation where we're
viewed
not just
as
fighting for
inefficient
ourselves.
rural sprawl.
We're fighting for the
Density,
soul
under
of
good
this city.
stewardship, can be a gift. It brings services
The
closer,
truth is a
shrinks
fragile
distances,
thing.
and supports public
It
life.
shatters easily in
But
the wrong
systematization
hands.
was not stewardship.
I
It
remember
was
the first time I
reallocation
saw
by
it.
decree,
The air
and
was
impatience
cold,
is the
still.
enemy of community.
There was a sense
By the
of finality to
mid-1980s,
everything.
the policy hardened into
A lot
a
of times
chilling
we don't
arithmetic.
know
Thousands
what
of
we're
villages
missing
penciled out for
until
full
it's gone.
or partial demolition. Hundreds of thousands of people projected
They
for
think they're in
relocation.
control,
The project would never
but they
fully
don't know what's
realize those
coming.
national quotas. History would interrupt it,
I mean,
but Bucharest more pliable,
at
under
that
the
point, I
direct
felt
gaze
like
of power,
I
would
really
not be
wanted to
spared.
invest in
The
something
target
I really
zone
enjoyed.
on and around Arsenal Hill, dense, intricate, lived in, was rubbed out. Whole streets disappeared from maps. Over 10,000 houses were demolished. More than 50,000 families were evicted. Churches, schools, hospitals, markets, things that knit a city, were torn out or pushed aside to clear a path for a new monumental geometry. Residents received notices that read like weather bulletins. The storm is coming. You must leave. Some were given apartments in newly built blocks, uniform, distant, unfamiliar. Compensation was often a rumor, not a reality. Memory became contraband. Living rooms turned into demolition sites. A city that had grown through time would now be poured at once. Part 4. Choosing an image. If the plan was the leader's, the image would be supplied by architects. A competition was organized. The proposals had a certain family resemblance. Symmetry as ideology, colonnades as sentence structure, centrality as theology. One concept in particular drew the dictator's favor, a daring vision by a young architect,
I know
Nicolae
things
Ceaușescu,
about you,
whose bold models,
things you wouldn't
large
want
enough to
anyone else
dominate
to
a
know.
room, seduce the eye the way scale models always do, by miniaturizing reality into something you feel you could control. Petrescu's concept wore a monumental vocabulary classicism as a scaffolding for socialism. Compared to the final building, her initial variation was slimmer, though its four corner masses already staked out the grammar of the ultimate facade. It was not copied from Pyongyang or Moscow, though anyone who has walked those capitals would recognize the family of forms. State as stone, gravity as message. Ceausescu and his wife, Elena herself an avatar of central control, would not delegate taste. They visited the site constantly, ordering revisions at the scale of rooms and at the scale of floors. Round windows should be square. No round again. Add a level. Another. Tear down that staircase. Build it again? No, again. The columns must be Doric, no, Ionic, no, Doric again. Symmetry measured by caliper. Floral carvings measured by ruler. Marble would be taken down and reset more than once, as if repetition could convert indecision into authority. Air conditioning? No. The leader feared toxins in the ducts. The building would rely on mass and lungs. Somewhere beneath, it was said, lay bunkers and tunnels to whisk the sovereign away if history arrived faster than expected. History would. Petrescu was made chief architect, coordinating a vast machine. Some 700 architects, thousands of engineers and workers. 3 shifts a day, 24 hours, 7 days a week. A building like a factory, assembled like a ship, supervised like a barracks. Part 5. The cost of monument numbers, in projects like this, are both measures and metaphors. The palace demanded around 1 million cubic meters of marble quarried, cut, polished, carried. About 550,000 tons of cement, 700,000 tons of steel, 2 million tons of sand, 900,000 cubic
I know
meters
things
of
about
wood.
you,
About
things you
550,000
wouldn't
tons
want
of
anyone
cement,
else to know.
700,000 tons of steel,
We're in a
2 million
situation where we're
tons of
not just
sand,
fighting for ourselves.
900,000 cubic
We're
meters of
fighting for
wood.
the soul of
It
this
swallowed
city.
3,500 tons of crystal for
The
chandeliers
truth
and
is a fragile
candelabras
thing.
enough sparkle
It
from mock
shatters
shortages.
easily in the wrong
Outside,
hands.
and
I
220,000
remember
square
the
meters
first
of
time I saw
carpet,
it.
vast
The
as
air was
fields.
cold.
3,500 square meters of leather covered the soft with a hard good not.
A
Ceausescu
lot of times we
insisted the
don't
palace be
know
built from
what we're
Romanian
missing
materials,
until
a
it's gone.
declaration of self-reliance that was also a sentence for local industry.
They think
Produce
they're
what
in
the palace
control,
wants, even if the
but they
country
don't know
lacks
what's
what the
coming.
people need. While households felt their hot water cut, and their
At that
heat
point, I
rationed.
felt like
The palace
I
was
really
plumbed
wanted
like a
to
town.
invest.
While state inspectors cracked down on families using bulbs over 140 watts, the palace was wired with tens of thousands of lamps. The building's appetite for electricity would rival a small city. The irony is not subtle. The building is not either. Estimates would later
I know
suggest
things
that,
about you.
over its construction, the
Things you
palace and
wouldn't
its
want
axis
anyone else to know.
consumed an extraordinary portion of national
We're in a
resources.
situation
The
where we're
kind
not
of
just fighting
budgetary
for
suction
ourselves.
that leaves 1,000
We're
small
fighting for the
deficits
soul
across
of
a
this
country.
city.
Clinics not repaired, buses not
The
replaced,
truth is a
roofs
fragile thing.
not patched, savings
It
not
shatters
saved.
easily in the
But a
wrong
palace's
hands.
purpose is to make you stop counting. Part 6. A city forced into a straight line. At the scale of a street, architecture shapes daily life. At the scale of a boulevard, it announces the daily life the state prefers. Ceausescu's victory of Socialism Boulevard would run 3.5 kilometers, roughly 90 meters wide, flanked by 10-story apartment blocks dressed in the costumes of grandeur. Seen from a distance, they look as if cut from a single stone and slid into place, ignoring the patchwork of the city around them. That is because, in a way, they were. Facades as curtain, city as stage. If the palace was the head of the diagram, the boulevard was the spine, and along its ribs would stand ministries' cultural halls and the piazza, constitute a semicircular square, conceived as a stage of address where the leader could stand on his balcony and face the carefully managed adoration of his people. One problem: the older city had its own sacred sites, many of them churches. Some were bulldozed. Others were moved not metaphorically, but physically, along rails, slid backwards or sideways, and tucked into new alignments where they would not interrupt the line of power. The engineer behind these moves earned a nickname that captures both the audacity and the pathos of the act: the engineer of heaven, saving spires by turning them into cargo. Imagine watching the church where you were married rolling down the street, your past literally unmoored. Imagine the sound like a ship docking. Imagine a city where gravity is not safe. Part 7. The rooms of authority. Step inside the palace, and the scale turns from horizon to interior weather. There are more than 1,000 rooms, each a variation on the theme of state. Long corridors where sound does not carry reception halls, where echo is part of the ceremony staircases that invite a procession rather than a commute. 10 floors above ground, 4 below, space calibrated for the fiction that all decisions are simple to make and simple to implement. In certain rooms, carpets roll like terrain. In others, marble patterns march like soldiers. Chandeliers articulate space not as light, but as presence, the ceiling reminding the floor who is in charge. Balconies face balconies across voids, as if the building is in conversation with itself. There are rooms designed for waiting, rooms designed for arrivals, rooms whose only purpose is to be bigger than the last. It is a building of verbs: receive, announce, instruct, display. There are no rooms designed to listen. Somewhere beneath it all, that rumored bunker, those rumored tunnels routes for vanishing. Strong men love exits. The problem with a labyrinth is that it is also a trap. Part 8. The boulevard script. If the palace is the verb to command, the boulevard is the verb to parade. It is the kind of street where distance is ceremony and width is control. The apartment blocks that flank it were intended for the nomenklatura, the party aristocracy whose lives were to be. Nestled within proximity to the leader, their windows becoming an audience, their balconies secondary stages. From certain vantage points, the apartments appear to have grown from the ground. From others, they look applied, pasted onto a canvas that was not theirs. In a sense, they are both: prefabrication as ideology, finish as performance. The general public could walk there, of course.
I know
But
things
the
about
public
you.
was not the boulevard's audience.
Things you
Power
wouldn't want
was.
anyone else to know.
And yet, cities are stubborn.
We're
Over
in a
time,
situation
a
where we're not
ceremonial
just fighting
avenue
for
becomes a
ourselves.
commuting route, a
We're fighting
photographic
for the
backdrop,
soul of this
a place
city.
to sell cars and ice cream and ideas.
The
Streets
truth
forget
is
their
a
original
fragile
script.
thing.
People write new
It
ones.
shatters easily in the
Part
wrong
9.
hands.
The trial you can't hear.
I remember the first time I saw
Ceausescu
it.
had planned to gaze
The
out
air
from
was
his
cold,
balcony and
still.
speak a new Rome into
There was
being.
a sense of finality
History
to
spoke
everything.
first. In
A
December
lot of times we don't
1989,
know what we're
Romanians,
missing
exhausted by shortages
until
and
it's gone.
surveillance, by propaganda and fear, rose.
They
The
think they're in
revolution that
control,
swept Eastern Europe
but they don't
arrived
know what's
fully
coming.
to Romania, and it moved quickly. The leader and his
I mean,
wife fled, were caught,
At
given a
that point,
brief
I felt
military
like
trial,
I really
and
wanted to
executed by
invest in
firing
something I
squad.
really
The
enjoyed.
building that was supposed to broadcast permanence outlived its speaker by hours and then by decades. The palace unfinished suddenly had no reason that would
I know
survive
things
its
about
shadow.
you.
What do you do with a building
Things you
that is
wouldn't want
both
anyone
stain
else to
and
know.
asset, both crime and artifact?
We're in a
Some
situation
said,
where we're not just fighting
demolish
for
it.
ourselves.
Erase the symbol.
We're fighting for
Make
the
a
soul
park
of
from a
this city.
scar. Others said, commodify it a
The
shopping mall,
truth is a
a
fragile
casino,
thing.
a theme park.
It shatters easily
Someone
in the wrong
somewhere
hands.
pitched Dracula,
I
because
remember the
Romania's
first time
most
I saw
exportable
it.
myth
The air was
apparently
cold,
must be asked
still.
to pay the rent.
There was a sense
There were
of
also
finality
planners
to
who
everything.
argued for densifying around
A
it,
lot of times we
weaving
don't
it into a
know
renewed
what
city
we're
fabric,
missing
making it
until it's
serve what
gone.
it had refused to see. The decision, ultimately,
They
was
think they're in
pragmatic.
control,
If the building exists
but they don't know what's
and it
coming.
cannot be unpoured, let it carry the weight it refused,
I mean,
the weight of democratic process.
at that point, I felt
The
like
palace would
I
become
really
the home
wanted
of
to
Parliament,
invest in
the
something I
Chamber
really
of Deputies,
enjoyed.
and the Senate. The ministries along the axis would host the labor of government. The square would host concerts,
I know
gatherings,
things about
civic
you.
spectacle. The irony is not
Things you
delicate.
wouldn't want any.
But cities are not poetry. They are continuity. You inherit the rooms your parents built, even when you did not ask for them. Part 10. The heaviest lesson: what is a palace for? It is a machine for asymmetry. One speaks, many listen. One decides, many obey. What is a parliament for? It is a machine for argument. Many speak, many listen. Some decide for a while. You can place
A
a
lot of
parliament
times we don't
inside a
know
palace.
what we're
The
missing
question is whether the building
until it's
learns
gone.
to listen too. Acoustics are not politics, but
They think
architecture
they're in
has a way
control,
of reinforcing habit.
but they
When you walk down corridors too long, when you meet in halls too grand, when your committee room looks like an antechamber to a coronation, your words can begin to dress like your surroundings. And yet, something powerful is at work here. Appropriation. Citizens entering a building that was built to dwarf them and using it to govern themselves. Staffers whose grandparents were evicted re-entering the space as authors of policy. A boulevard that once staged certainty, now staging debate about traffic and zoning and noise and culture. The city folding tragedy into routine. The palace remains the second largest administrative building in the world, after the Pentagon, and the largest parliamentary seat by volume. It still consumes energy like a town. It still generates controversy like a factory. But it no longer dictates, it hosts. Sometimes hosting is how you redeem a place you cannot forgive. Part 11. What was lost numbers can count what was spent. They cannot account for what vanished. The neighborhoods erased were not abstract. They had smells, the yeasty bloom of bread at 6 a.m., the iron and oil of a bicycle shop, the stone dust after rain. They had angles where the sun hit a certain wall at a certain hour and made you think of a person you loved. They had roots, a child's path to school, a grandmother's path to market, worn into saws and sidewalks. They had noises, the shout of a vendor 3 streets over who could be counted on to mispronounce your name the same way every day and make you laugh. All those micro-contracts a city signs with its self-trusts between neighbors, truces between cats and dogs, treaties between fig trees and fences, were shredded. In their place, a mighty boulevard, a mighty building, a mighty silence. The earthquakes of politics are not measured on seismographs. Their aftershocks are culture. When you tear the pattern out of an urban fabric, you alter not just the map, but the grammar of life. How long it takes to grow old in a courtyard, how easy it is to be found when you want to be found, how hard it is to be alone when you need to be. These are losses without plaques. Part 12. The aesthetics of power authoritarian architecture often speaks in an old dialect columns, axes, symmetries, because those are reliable tools for producing the sensation of inevitability. If a facade reminds you of Rome, it borrows Rome's aura, endurance, law, empire. If it reminds you of Paris, it borrows taste. Of Pyongyang, it borrows discipline. The building stitches itself into a lineage where power pretends to equal pedigree. Ceausescu's palace was meant to be timeless, which is to say, placeless as if any city could have hosted it. But architecture is a conversation with context. Even buildings that try to ignore their surroundings end up defining them. The palace did not fit Bucharest. It made a new Bucharest around itself and declared this was the original scene. Today, a visitor standing on the boulevard might think the city was born in one gesture. But turn 2 or 3 blocks away, and you find other Bucharests older and newer arguing with the line. Narrow streets where balconies fight for room with power lines, villas that recall Parisian ambitions from a different century, modern towers that speak the global language of glass. The palace is not the only truth. It is the loudest. Part 13. The work of memory. What should a city do with a monument it did not consent to? One option is erasure. Pull it down, plant trees. Say nothing. Another is curation. Keep it, isolate it, place a museum label on the door, and demand it apologize. A third Romania's choice is integration. Fill it with the daily boredom of democracy until the building that once signified fear comes to mean routine. Boredom is underrated as a political tool. A palace of power turned into a palace of paperwork. Grand stairs warmed by the souls of civil servants. Chandeliers illuminating budget debates. Echoing halls tamed by microphones. That is victory through administration. But integration should not become amnesia. Plaques, archives, oral histories, school curricula, these are the scaffolds that let citizens remember who paid for the marble and how. You do not keep a scar to admire it. You keep a scar to learn where not to cut again. Part 14. The Engineer of Heaven. One figure deserves a pause, the engineer who moved churches. He and his teams devised a method to lift massive masonry structures, slide them along rails, and settle them into new foundations like ships eased into dry dock. Their work saved sacred buildings that otherwise would have been erased by the line of the boulevard. There is a complicated ethics to this saving. Is a church rescued if it loses its street? Does a sanctuary keep its soul if its front door now faces the back of a ministry? Moving a building preserves its matter. It displaces its meaning. And yet, without those moves, there would be nothing left to argue about. In the city's long memory, that engineers' rails will be a kind of mercy, a proof that even inside a machine built for erasure, people found ways to reduce the damage. Cities are not only the sum of power's decisions, they are the sum of everyday resistance's craftsmen who do their job too well to obey injustice entirely. Part 15. The Parliament today. Walk the axis now, and you will see a city that has metabolized the insult. The ministry's work. The square hosts concerts. The boulevard is a postcard and a traffic jam. The apartments once reserved for the party elite are now some of the most valuable addresses in the city. Inside the palace, committees convene under ceilings intended for coronations. Staffers slip through side doors carrying laptops, not dossiers sealed with wax. Journalists wait in lobbies that were built for ambassadors. Protesters gather outside where the leader once planned to receive applause, and their noise turns the geometry back into public space. Is it perfect? No. Symbols are sticky. Marble remembers what it was for. But symbolism is not destiny. What defines a democracy is not whether its buildings are pure. It is whether its citizens are stubborn. Part 16 Lessons in Concrete. What does this story teach? Disaster tempts power. The 1977 earthquake was tragedy. It was also opportunity for a leader who wanted to swap emergency response for permanent redesign. We should be wary when leaders see in ruin not grief, but blank canvas. Scale is an argument. A building this large does not whisper. It tells you what it thinks you are, small. When you inherit such a building, the work is to talk back to turn scale into service. Cities are memory machines. Demolition destroys the mnemonics of daily life. Urban plans should be drawn with people in mind, not merely lines. A good street remembers you. A bad axis forgets that you exist. Integration beats erasure, not always, but often. You cannot unpour a palace. You can outuse it, fill it with debates and dullness until it no longer intimidates. Architecture is never neutral. Columns, carpets, and crystal can be tools of state or toys for it. We must ask of any grand project, whose life improves, whose life moves, whose life disappears? Part 17, the heaviest building, the lightest gesture. There is a scene you will not find in the blueprints. On a weekday around sunset, the palace is dim behind its floodlights. At the edge of the square, a couple leans against a low wall, balancing plastic cups of sunflower seeds, throwing shells toward a trash can and missing every time. They are arguing about whether to buy a used Dacia or save for something newer.